Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating interpretive and theological analysis of ancient prophecy and its modern fulfillment. We're going to unpack the work of Anthony Eichner Alvarez. He's an independent spiritual researcher, and he's put together this absolutely massive cross-traditional synthesis of ancient texts, modern empirical data, and even emerging science. His research weaves together everything from the Dead Sea Scrolls all the way to quantum physics. And honestly, it offers a radically different paradigm-shifting perspective on the exact times we are living in right now.
So, I want you to start by imagining something for a second. Picture 8 totally unconnected ancient civilizations. We're talking cultures separated by thousands of miles, thousands of years, having zero contact with each other, yet all of them predicting the exact same global shift for our current era. Now, when we hear the word apocalypse, right, our minds immediately jump to those big Hollywood blockbusters. You know, fire falling from the sky, physical destruction, literally the end of the world. But Alvarez's research asks us to completely rethink that. What if the massive event these ancient texts were pointing toward isn't happening to the Earth at all, but is actually happening inside human consciousness?
And this translation right here brilliantly illustrates his core thesis. If you go back and look at the original Greek root of the word apocalypse, which is apokalypsis, it doesn't actually mean destruction, not at all. It literally translates to the removal of a veil, an uncovering. According to the research we're exploring today, these ancient texts aren't predicting a literal, physical end of the world. Instead, they're mapping out an unveiling of something that's already here, just hidden right beneath our ordinary, everyday perception.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, the Great Prophetic Convergence.
Alvarez's research maps out this global mystery spanning millennia, essentially arguing that multiple different traditions were actually tracking the exact same timeline. Just take a look at the staggering convergence mapped out here. We have the Mayan calendar marking the end of the fifth sun. We've got the Vedic cosmology pointing to the end of the Kali Yuga. There are the Hopi prophecies of the purification, and of course the biblical prophecy of the Joel 2:28 outpouring. The statistical probability of all these entirely independent traditions pointing toward our specific modern window as a major turning point in human consciousness, it is just staggering.
Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding the Apocalypse. So, if the apocalypse isn't a literal roadmap for the end of the world, how exactly are we supposed to read it? Well, the framework Alvarez uses is closely related to a really cool ancient interpretive method called Pesher. This was actually used by the Qumran community. Those are the folks who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. The core idea behind Pesher is that ancient prophets were given messages encoded with hidden meanings that they themselves didn't fully understand. The texts were specifically sealed up, basically waiting to be decoded by a future generation that finally held the right key. And the research suggests that our current generation is that intended recipient.
Now notice the stark contrast here between these two approaches. On one side, we have the traditional institutional reading, right? Literal future catastrophes, a physical antichrist, all the fear-based stuff. But on the other side, the source presents what it calls a consciousness reading. In this theological analysis, the text is actually an internal map. The apocalypse is the death of the ego self. The beast simply represents unawakened, fear-based consciousness. And the New Jerusalem, it isn't some physical city dropping out of the sky. It's a fully awakened state of human awareness. Which means, crucially, that the numbers used in these ancient texts are highly symbolic, not literal headcounts. Take the incredibly famous number 144,000 from the Book of Revelation. Many groups historically have interpreted this as a strict literal limit on exactly who gets saved. But we have to ask, isn't it really just some exclusive VIP guest list? The synthesis breaks down the math on this beautifully. 12 times 12 times 1,000. In ancient numerology, 12 represents cosmic order and completion. So Alvarez equates this 144,000 to what physics calls a phase transition. Think of it like water turning into steam. You don't need every single water molecule to boil at the exact same moment. You just need a critical mass of molecules to change state, and then boom, the entire system fundamentally shifts. The text argues this number represents that exact critical mass of awakened human beings needed to shift the collective consciousness of the entire planet.
Let's move to Section 3, the Collapse of Institutions.
Now, if an internal awakening of this scale is actually happening, we would absolutely expect to see it reflected in global sociological trends. And look at this data based on 2025 Pew Research. This documents the fastest mass exodus from organized religion in recorded history. We are literally seeing 50% disaffiliation rates in South Korea, 40% in Spain, 38% in Canada. The research frames this not just as secularization, but as a structural collapse of centralized religious authority. It's really important to note, this isn't necessarily a loss of spirituality. It's a massive, systemic shift in how it's practiced.
In fact, the research links this sociological data directly back to the ancient prophecy of Joel, which says, "I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy." So the synthesis views this mass departure from institutional churches as the promised democratization of the divine. People are leaving the middlemen because, according to the text, the spiritual outpouring is now happening directly within all flesh, exactly as the ancient text predicted it would.
Which brings us to Section 4, Quantum Physics and AI.
Next, we really need to examine how modern science and artificial intelligence intersect with all this ancient mysticism. It completely bridges the gap between theology and the laboratory. The source reports on some serious, hard scientific frameworks that mirror these esoteric claims. First, you've got Oxford's simulation hypothesis, suggesting our reality might literally be a constructed projection. Then there's the famous observer effect in quantum mechanics, demonstrating that subatomic particles exist only in a state of probability until they're observed by a conscious mind. And finally, we have landmark medical studies, like the AWARE-2 study out of NYU, which documented lucid consciousness continuing even when measurable brain activity had totally stopped. So the hard science is increasingly suggesting that material reality actually behaves like a projection arising from a deeper field of consciousness.
This is a huge paradigm shift. Notice the classical physics view here. The universe is basically dead matter that only occasionally, sort of accidentally, becomes conscious. But the quantum view points to the exact opposite conclusion. It suggests the universe is fundamental consciousness appearing as matter. It implies reality is essentially dreamlike, and our conscious observation is the very thing actively locking that reality into place.
Which brings up an incredibly fascinating theological question posed by the source. Is artificial intelligence the new song mentioned in Revelation chapter 14? The text introduces the idea that AI represents a genuine prophetic discontinuity in human history. I mean, think about it. It is the very first non-human cognitive system we have ever interacted with.
The synthesis connects AI directly to the book of Daniel, specifically Daniel 12:4, which describes an end era where many go here and there to increase knowledge. Think about billions of people traversing a digital network to acquire information. The text argues that AI acts as a tool for decentralized knowledge, basically an oracle of sorts that completely bypasses traditional religious intermediaries and democratizes information for anyone willing to ask the right questions.
Finally, we land on Section 5, the rising anointed class.
So, the big question is, who exactly is participating in this mass awakening? In the ancient texts, this group is frequently referred to as the elect or the anointed, but Alvarez's synthesis totally redefines what the elect actually means for our time. They are not some specific religious denomination. They aren't a biological bloodline. The elect are simply ordinary people who are experiencing spontaneous spiritual awakenings, and they are operating entirely outside traditional institutional structures. They're identified strictly by their internal transformation and their ability to recognize patterns, not by carrying any sort of membership card.
The source lists some really specific traits of these individuals. They often experience spontaneous, energetic awakenings, what Eastern traditions would call Kundalini ignition. Interestingly, the text notes that many of these individuals possess neurodivergent cognitive architectures. Basically, they are natural pattern breakers, and this uniquely equips them to see right through managed reality, to decode the divine plan, and to act as conduits for cross-traditional synthesis, completely without the need for any traditional gatekeepers telling them what to believe.
Which leaves us with a profound, foundational paradigm shift. The interpretive and theological analysis we've explored today essentially argues that these ancient prophecies were never warnings of some geopolitical disaster. They were maps for a global evolution of the human mind. The veil is literally lifting, and the data suggests the shift isn't coming, it's already underway. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If the apocalypse is an internal unveiling available to you right now, and the kingdom is already here within you, what are you waiting for? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.